That useless mama's boy couldn't run this bakery if his life depended on it. Once I get the deed transferred, I'm selling it and finally living the life I deserve. The words sliced through me like a knife as I stood frozen behind the storage room door. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, was laughing with someone on the phone, completely unaware I could hear every poisonous word. My son David had no idea the woman he'd married was plotting to destroy everything our family had built for 3 generations. I felt my hands trembling as I backed away silently, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. In that moment, I knew I had to act carefully, methodically. I would gather the proof I needed and expose her before she could steal my son's inheritance and break his heart. If you're watching this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to Ellie's Stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. That Saturday morning in April started like any other weekend at Morrison's Bakery. The sun was just beginning to warm the brick facade of our building on Main Street in Riverside, Connecticut, the same building my grandparents had purchased back in 1952. I arrived early, as I always did, to check on the overnight dough rising in the proofing room. The familiar scent of yeast and flour wrapped around me like a warm blanket, a smell that had defined my entire life. My son David was already there, his white apron dusted with flour, pulling the first batch of sourdough loaves from the stone oven. His face lit up when he saw me, just like it had when he was a little boy sneaking cookies from the display case. "Morning, Mom," he called out, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I started the rye bread early like you taught me. Want to check the crust?" I examined the golden brown loaf he held up, my heart swelling with pride. This boy, my only child, had inherited his father's passion for baking and my stubborn determination to preserve family traditions. When my husband Thomas died 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, David had stepped up without hesitation, learning every recipe, every technique, working 16-hour days to keep our legacy alive. "Perfect color," I murmured, running my finger along the crust. "Your father would be so proud." The shop was preparing for a special occasion that evening. We were hosting our annual spring anniversary celebration, marking 71 years since my grandparents had opened the bakery. The entire community was invited. Longtime customers, neighbors, local business owners. Even the mayor had confirmed he'd attend. Vanessa had insisted on organizing the whole event, claiming she wanted to honor our family tradition. I'd hesitated at first, sensing something off in her eager smile, but David had been so happy to see his wife taking interest in the bakery that I'd agreed. White lights were already strung across the ceiling of our expanded seating area. Round tables covered in cream-colored cloths waited for the evening's guests. Through the front windows, I could see merchants across the street setting up their own displays, the whole downtown preparing for the festivities. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop waved at me, holding up a beautiful arrangement of spring tulips she'd prepared for our celebration. Around 10 o'clock, Vanessa swept through the front door, wearing designer sunglasses and carrying shopping bags from expensive boutiques. Her heels clicked sharply against our worn wooden floors, a sound that had always grated on my nerves. She was beautiful, I had to admit, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than we made in a week. But there was something cold in her green eyes, something calculating that I'd noticed from the very first time David brought her home 2 years ago. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, barely glancing at me as she headed toward the office. She'd never called me Mom, never even tried to build that bridge. "I need to finalize some paperwork for tonight's event. David, sweetheart, could you sign these catering contracts?" My son wiped his hands on his apron and followed her like a puppy, trusting and eager to please. I watched them disappear into the office, a knot forming in my stomach. Something about the way she'd said paperwork made my maternal instincts scream danger. I tried to focus on preparing the special pastries for the evening, delicate cream puffs and fruit tarts, my grandmother's famous apple strudel, but my mind kept wandering to that closed office door. After about 30 minutes, I decided to bring them some coffee, a peace offering, and an excuse to check on what they were doing. I prepared 2 cups, added cream to David's just the way he liked it, and carried them toward the office on a small tray. That's when I heard Vanessa's voice, sharp and irritated, coming from the storage room adjacent to the office. The door was slightly ajar, and she must have stepped in there to take a phone call, not realizing how sound carried through our old building's thin walls. "No, Mother, you don't understand. That useless mama's boy couldn't run this bakery if his life depended on it. He's completely dependent on Margaret for every single decision. Once I get the deed transferred to my name, I'm selling this whole operation. The property alone is worth at least $2 million, prime downtown location. I've already got a developer interested in turning it into luxury condos." My hands froze on the coffee tray. The cups rattled slightly, but I forced myself to stay silent, to keep listening. Vanessa's laugh was cruel, mocking. "David actually thinks I care about his precious family legacy. Please. I married him for the business, nothing else. Once the sale goes through, I'm filing for divorce and taking half of everything. Let him and his mother figure out what to do then." The voice on the other end must have asked a question because Vanessa responded with annoyance. "Yes, I already have him signing the transfer documents. He thinks they're just LLC reorganization papers. He trusts me completely, the fool. His lawyer keeps asking questions, but I've got my own attorney handling everything. By the time Margaret realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. The property will be in my name, and there's nothing she can do about it." I stood there, trembling, as she continued to outline her plan in cold, businesslike terms. Every word was another nail in my heart. This woman my son loved, whom he'd trusted with everything, was systematically planning to steal his inheritance and abandon him. The coffee cups shook so violently in my hands that I had to set the tray down on a nearby shelf before I dropped it. I backed away silently, my mind racing. I needed to tell David immediately, needed to stop him from signing anything else. But as I turned toward the office, I heard him laughing inside, probably at something Vanessa had said when she returned from her phone call. He sounded so happy, so content. How could I destroy that, with accusations he'd never believe? Vanessa had spent 2 years positioning herself as the perfect wife, supportive and loving in public. My word against hers would only drive a wedge between David and me. I needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence that would force my son to see the truth. The anniversary celebration that evening felt like torture. The bakery was packed with over 100 guests, everyone praising the food, congratulating David and Vanessa on running such a successful business. Vanessa played her role perfectly, smiling graciously, thanking people for their support, holding David's hand like a loving wife. I watched her work the room, saw how she'd positioned herself as the future of Morrison's Bakery, and felt sick to my stomach. The mayor gave a speech about family businesses being the backbone of Riverside. Mrs. Chen presented us with a beautiful plaque. David stood at the microphone, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about continuing his grandparents' legacy, about how grateful he was to have Vanessa by his side. When he looked at his wife, his eyes shone with such love and trust that I had to turn away, blinking back tears. I tried to pull David aside during the party, managed to get him alone near the kitchen for just a moment. "Son, we need to talk about those papers Vanessa had you sign. Did you have our lawyer review them first?" His smile faded slightly, replaced by a defensive frown. "Mom, Vanessa's just helping modernize our business structure. She has an MBA. She knows what she's doing. You need to trust her. David, please, just have Andrew look at them before." "Enough." His voice was sharp, a tone he'd never used with me before. "I know you've never really accepted Vanessa, but she's my wife. She's trying to help us grow the business, to prepare for the future. I need you to support us, not question everything she does." Before I could respond, Vanessa appeared, slipping her arm through David's, with a sympathetic smile aimed at me. "Is everything okay? Margaret, you look upset. Are you feeling well? Maybe you should sit down, rest a bit. These events can be exhausting at your age." The subtle condescension in her voice made my blood boil, but I forced myself to nod. "I'm fine, dear. Just tired." As they walked away together, I heard Vanessa whisper to David, loud enough for me to catch. "Your mother seems stressed lately. Maybe she's working too hard. We should really consider whether it's time for her to take a step back, enjoy her retirement." Retirement. She was already planning to push me out completely. Over the next few days, I noticed how the atmosphere in the bakery had shifted. Vanessa was there every morning now, inserting herself into every decision, every conversation. She'd hired a new accountant, someone I'd never met, claiming our old bookkeeper was outdated. She'd started talking about renovations, changing our classic recipes to appeal to modern tastes, bringing in consultants who knew nothing about our history. Worse, she was poisoning David's perception of me. I'd overhear her making comments about how I was resistant to change, how my old-fashioned methods were holding the business back. David, who'd always valued my experience, started second-guessing my suggestions. When I recommended we stick with our traditional sourdough recipe, he sided with Vanessa's push to try a faster, cheaper commercial yeast version. "Mom, you have to understand, we need to adapt to survive," he explained one afternoon, his voice gentle but firm. "Vanessa's showing me industry reports, customer surveys. People want faster service, lower prices. We can't stay stuck in the past." I wanted to scream that our customers loved us because we refused to compromise on quality, because we honored tradition. But I could see the wall Vanessa had built between us, growing higher with every passing day. Then came the incident at the Riverside Business Association meeting. Every month, local business owners gathered at the community center to discuss downtown development and support each other. I'd been a member for 35 years, had served as treasurer for a decade. That month, when I walked into the meeting room, the usual warm greetings felt muted. People smiled politely, but didn't wave me over to sit with them like they normally did. I took my usual seat and tried to participate in the discussion about the upcoming summer festival, but I noticed whispers behind me, pointed glances. Finally, during the coffee break, Sarah Martinez from the bookstore approached me with an uncomfortable expression. "Margaret, I hate to bring this up, but I heard something concerning from Vanessa. She mentioned that you've been having some memory issues lately? Getting confused about orders, mixing up recipes?" I stared at her, speechless. "That's absolutely not true. Who told you that?" Sarah shifted awkwardly. "Vanessa mentioned it to several of us. She said David's worried about you but doesn't want to hurt your feelings. She said you've been resisting their efforts to help, that you're struggling to accept you're getting older." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa wasn't just planning to steal the bakery. She was systematically destroying my reputation, positioning me as a confused elderly woman who couldn't be trusted. When the truth came out, who would believe me over her? Over the following weeks, the whispers grew louder. I'd walk into the grocery store and see former customers quickly look away. At church, where I'd attended for 40 years, people greeted me with pitying smiles instead of genuine warmth. One Sunday, I overheard two women in the bathroom discussing how sad it was that David had to deal with his mother's decline, how patient Vanessa was being. I felt completely isolated, watching my son drift further away while Vanessa tightened her grip on everything we'd built. The worst moment came when I found David in the office late one night, reviewing documents with a troubled expression. I'd hoped he was finally seeing through her deception, but when he looked up at me, his eyes were filled with sadness. "Mom, Vanessa and I think it might be time for you to take a break from the bakery. Just temporarily," he added quickly, seeing my stricken face. "You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve to rest, maybe travel, enjoy your retirement." "David, this is my life. I don't want to retire. And I'm not sick or confused like Vanessa's been telling people." He sighed heavily. "Mom, I know it's hard to admit, but you have been forgetting things. Last week you used salt instead of sugar in the morning pastries. You've been showing up at odd hours, forgetting what day it is. Vanessa's been covering for you, trying to protect you. But those are lies." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. I never made those mistakes. "Vanessa's lying to you. Can't you see that?" The disappointment in his eyes broke my heart. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're becoming paranoid, making accusations against Vanessa. Mom, I think you need to see a doctor. Please, let me make you an appointment." I realized then that arguing was useless. Vanessa had done her work too well, planting seeds of doubt so deep that my own son questioned my sanity. I left the office and went home to my small house, the one Thomas and I had bought when David was born. I sat in the dark kitchen, overwhelmed by helplessness and rage. But as the hours passed and the initial shock faded, something else emerged: determination. I was not going to let this woman destroy my son's life and steal his inheritance. I was not going to be pushed aside and dismissed as a confused old woman. I might be 67 years old, but I was far from helpless. The next morning, I made a phone call to someone I should have contacted weeks ago: our family lawyer, Andrew Patterson. Andrew had handled our business affairs for 20 years, had helped Thomas set up the LLC structure that protected our assets. I explained everything I'd heard, my concerns about the documents Vanessa had David signing. Andrew's voice was grave when he responded. "Margaret, I'm glad you called. I've been trying to reach David for weeks." Vanessa hired a different attorney to handle what she called routine business updates. "I've seen some of the paperwork. She filed it with the county clerk, and I have serious concerns. She's been systematically transferring assets into a new LLC with her name as primary owner. If David signed what I think he signed, she could have legal control over the property." My worst fears confirmed. I asked the question I was terrified to hear answered: can we stop it? We need evidence of fraud or coercion. Right now, it looks like David signed willingly. Do you have anything concrete? Recordings, documents, witnesses? I thought of that phone conversation I'd overheard, how I'd been too shocked to record it. Not yet, but I'll get it. What do I need? Andrew explained what would hold up in court. Proof that Vanessa had deceived David about the nature of the documents, evidence of her intent to defraud, anything showing she married him specifically to steal the business. He also recommended I hire a private investigator, someone who could dig into Vanessa's background and current activities. That afternoon, I met with a private investigator named Catherine Ross. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, former police detective, with short gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. We met at a coffee shop 3 towns over, where no one would recognize me. "I've handled cases like this before," Catherine stated after I explained the situation. "Second spouses systematically positioning themselves to inherit or steal assets. The key is finding the pattern, proving intent. I'll need to look into her financial records, her past relationships, her communications. It won't be cheap, and it'll take time." "I have money saved," I responded immediately. "Whatever it costs, my son's entire future is at stake." Catherine nodded and pulled out a contract. "I'll start immediately. In the meantime, document everything, every conversation, every business decision she makes, anything suspicious, and be careful. If she realizes you're investigating, she might accelerate her timeline." Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I never thought I'd be: a spy in my own son's life. I started arriving at the bakery at odd hours, pretending to check on overnight operations, but really searching for evidence. I photographed documents Vanessa left on the office desk, forwarding them to Andrew. I recorded conversations when I could, using the voice memo app David had taught me to use on my phone. The hardest part was maintaining a facade of normalcy while my heart was breaking. David remained distant, clearly torn between loyalty to me and his wife. Vanessa continued her perfect performance, all while slowly dismantling everything Thomas and I had built. Then Catherine called with her first major finding. "I've been tracking Vanessa's financial activities. 2 things stand out. First, she's been meeting regularly with a real estate developer named Richard Thornton. I have photographs of them having lunch, touring the bakery property from outside. Second, and this is bigger, I found her previous marriage. She was married before?" I gripped the phone tighter. David never mentioned that, because she never told him. She was married 5 years ago to a man named Gregory Walsh. He owned a successful restaurant in Boston. 6 months after their wedding, she'd maneuvered herself into controlling the business. She sold it out from under him, divorced him, and walked away with nearly $1 million. Gregory's still fighting her in court, but she's protected her assets well. My hands trembled as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't opportunistic greed, it was a calculated pattern. Vanessa was a predator who targeted family businesses, married the heirs, and systematically stole their inheritance. There's more, Catherine continued. I've been monitoring her phone records legally, through public records requests. She's been in constant contact with someone named Diane Porter. Diane works at the county clerk's office, processing property transfers. I think Vanessa has an inside contact, helping her expedite the paperwork. Can you prove it? I'm working on it. But Margaret, there's something else you should know. Vanessa's planning something soon. I overheard her on the phone. She was at a restaurant and didn't notice me nearby. Talking about a timeline. She said, by the end of June, everything will be finalized. That's less than 2 weeks away. My blood ran cold. Whatever Vanessa was planning, she was preparing to execute it soon. We were running out of time. That weekend, Catherine called me with urgency in her voice. I have something. Vanessa met with a woman named Jessica Brennan this morning at a cafe in Hartford. I managed to get close enough to record part of their conversation. Jessica is actually Gregory Walsh's ex-wife from before Vanessa, another one of her victims. She reached out to me after reading my inquiries into public records. Margaret, she wants to help. She knows Vanessa's playbook, and she has documentation from her own case. The next day, I drove 2 hours to meet Jessica at a quiet diner near the Massachusetts border. She was younger than me, maybe 50, with tired eyes that held the weight of someone who'd been through hell. When I sat down across from her, she slid a thick folder across the table. When I heard someone else was investigating Vanessa, I knew I had to come forward, Jessica began, her voice shaking slightly. She destroyed my life. My husband Gregory and I built our restaurant from nothing. 20 years of hard work. Vanessa came in as a hostess, sweet and charming. Within 6 months, she'd seduced Gregory, convinced him I was stealing from the business, turned our staff against me. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd married him and transferred half our assets into her name. The legal battle bankrupted me. I opened the folder Jessica had brought. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, email printouts. This is everything I gathered for my lawsuit. Her pattern, her methods, even some of her accomplices. She uses the same attorney every time. A man named Richard Strauss in Manhattan. He specializes in asset protection and knows exactly how to structure these thefts to look legal. She also has relationships with people in county offices who help expedite paperwork. Why would she risk doing this multiple times? I wondered aloud. Wouldn't people catch on? Jessica's laugh was bitter. She changes locations, uses different last names, waits a few years between targets. And she's smart enough to choose victims whose families are small, isolated. Gregory had no siblings. His parents were dead. She specifically targets people who won't have a lot of support to fight back. Your son, with just you, fit her profile perfectly. As I reviewed the documents, I saw the exact playbook Vanessa had used on David. The gradual isolation from family, the whisper campaign about the victim's competence, the rushed legal paperwork disguised as routine business matters, and finally, the swift sale and divorce. How do I stop her? I asked desperately. Jessica leaned forward, her expression fierce. You need to catch her in the act of fraud. Record her admitting her real intentions. Get proof she deliberately deceived David. And you need to move fast, because once she files the final transfer paperwork, it becomes much harder to reverse. You'll be fighting in court for years, like I am. Armed with Jessica's information and Catherine's investigation findings, I went back to Andrew. We laid out everything on his conference room table, building our case. Andrew studied the documents carefully, comparing them to what Vanessa had filed for David's business. It's the same pattern, identical structure, he confirmed. But here's the problem. Everything she's done looks technically legal on paper. David signed the documents of his own free will. Unless we can prove she defrauded him, misrepresented what he was signing, a judge won't overturn the transfers. What if we had a recording of her admitting she married him to steal the business? I pulled out my phone, playing the snippet I'd recorded of her phone conversation that first day. It wasn't great quality, muffled and partial, but her words were clear enough. Andrew listened intently. This helps, but a defense attorney would argue it's taken out of context, or that she was just venting frustration. We need something more direct, preferably with David present to witness her true character. Catherine spoke up from where she'd been reviewing her own notes. I might have an idea. Vanessa's planning a meeting with the developer Richard Thornton this Thursday at 2 p.m. I've been tracking her calendar through her assistant's public social media posts. She overshares. If we could record that meeting, get her discussing the sale of the property with specific details about deceiving David, that would be undeniable proof. We spent the next 2 days planning carefully. Catherine would position herself near the restaurant where Vanessa was meeting Thornton, using professional recording equipment. I would be there too, as backup, in case we needed a witness to testify about what was said. Thursday arrived cold and rainy, matching my anxious mood. Catherine and I sat in her car across the street from an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Hartford. At exactly 2 p.m., Vanessa's silver Mercedes pulled up. She stepped out wearing an expensive suit, her blonde hair perfect despite the rain. Minutes later, a tall man in his 50s arrived, clearly Richard Thornton. Catherine had already planted a recording device inside the restaurant earlier, disguised as a corporate gift to the owner for a fake award. It was risky and possibly illegal, but Andrew had advised us that given the circumstances, the evidence would likely be admissible if it proved fraud. We sat in tense silence as the meeting progressed. Catherine monitored the recording through her headphones, her expression growing grimmer with each passing minute. Finally, after 45 minutes, both Vanessa and Thornton emerged. They shook hands at the door, Vanessa's smile triumphant. As soon as they drove away, Catherine turned to me. We got it, everything. She laid out the entire plan, told him the property would be officially in her name by June 30th, discussed how she'd been manipulating David, even laughed about how easy it was to fool him. Margaret, this is exactly what we needed. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt heartbroken. Hearing Vanessa's cold discussion of my son, someone she was supposed to love, reduced to nothing more than a mark in her con, made me want to weep. But there was no time for grief. We had to act immediately. Andrew filed an emergency motion with the Superior Court, requesting an injunction to stop any property transfers pending a fraud investigation. He submitted our evidence: the recording from the restaurant, Jessica's testimony about Vanessa's pattern, Catherine's investigation showing the previous marriage Vanessa had hidden, and financial records showing her communications with the developer. The judge granted a temporary hearing for the following Monday. That gave us 3 days to prepare and, most importantly, to finally make David see the truth. That Friday evening, I went to the bakery just before closing. David was there alone, cleaning the kitchen, his white apron stained with the day's work. When he saw me, his expression was guarded. Mom, if you're here to argue about Vanessa again, David, please, just sit down and listen to me for 5 minutes. That's all I ask. 5 minutes, and if you still don't believe me, I'll walk away and never bring it up again. Something in my voice must have reached him, because he sighed and nodded, pulling out a chair at one of the cafe tables. I sat across from him, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. I'm going to play you something. I need you to listen to the whole thing before you react. I pressed play on the recording from the restaurant. Vanessa's voice filled the quiet bakery, clear and unmistakable. The property transfer finalizes June 30th. Once it's in my name, I'll immediately accept Thornton's offer. $2.3 million for the building and land. Morrison's bakery will be demolished for luxury condos. Thornton's voice. And your husband? Vanessa's laugh, cold and cruel. David won't know until it's done. By the time he realizes what happened, I'll have filed for divorce and protected the sale proceeds. He's been so easy to manipulate, the poor fool. Thinks I actually care about his precious family legacy. I watched David's face drain of color. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. The recording continued with more damning details before I finally stopped it. The silence that followed felt suffocating. There's more, I whispered, tears streaming down my face now. She's done this before, David. To at least 2 other men. She targets family businesses, marries the heirs, and steals everything. I have testimony from her previous victim. I have evidence of everything she's been doing. David stared at the phone in my hands like it was a bomb. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. How long have you known? I overheard her on the phone the day of our anniversary party. I've been investigating since then, because I knew you wouldn't believe me without proof. I'm so sorry, son. I should have told you sooner, but you were right. His voice cracked. God, Mom, you tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. I chose her over you. I thought you were just being difficult, couldn't accept that I was grown up with my own life. He broke down then, his shoulders shaking with sobs. I moved around the table and held my son like I used to when he was small and the world had hurt him. We stayed like that for a long time, grieving together for the betrayal and the innocence lost. When the tears finally stopped, David looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. What do we do now? I explained about the court hearing Monday, about Andrew's emergency injunction, about all the evidence we'd gathered. David listened, his expression shifting from devastation to determination. I want to be there, he declared firmly. At the hearing, I want to face her and hear her try to lie her way out of this. That weekend was surreal. David moved back into my house, unable to stay in the home he'd shared with Vanessa. He barely spoke, processing the magnitude of the deception. I cooked his favorite meals, gave him space when he needed it, and held him when the anger and hurt overwhelmed him. Vanessa called repeatedly, clearly suspicious about David's sudden distance. He didn't answer, following Andrew's advice to avoid any contact before the hearing. Monday morning arrived gray and heavy with humidity. The Superior Court building loomed imposingly on Elm Street, all stone columns and serious atmosphere. Andrew met us on the steps, briefcase in hand, looking every bit the seasoned attorney ready for battle. Remember, he instructed as we climbed the stairs, stay calm, no matter what happens in there. Let the evidence speak. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with wood-paneled walls and rows of benches. Vanessa was already there with her attorney, Richard Strauss, a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit. When she saw David and me enter together, her confident expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered, plastering on a concerned smile. David, sweetheart, what's going on? She stood as if to approach him, but her attorney put a restraining hand on her arm. The judge entered, an older woman with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes behind reading glasses. Judge Helen Morrison, ironically sharing our family name, called the hearing to order. Andrew presented our case methodically, playing the recording from the restaurant first. The audio quality was excellent, thanks to Catherine's professional equipment. Vanessa's voice filled the courtroom, callous and calculating, discussing the sale of the bakery and her plans to divorce David. I watched Vanessa's face as her own words condemned her. She went pale, then flushed red, whispering urgently to her attorney. Strauss tried to object on procedural grounds, but Judge Morrison silenced him with a sharp look. I'll decide what's admissible, counselor. Continue, Mr. Patterson. Andrew then called Jessica Brennan to the stand. Jessica testified about Vanessa's previous marriage to Gregory, the identical pattern of behavior, the financial devastation she'd left in her wake. She presented documents showing Vanessa had used a different last name, had hidden the previous marriage from David, establishing a pattern of deception. Catherine Ross testified next about her investigation, presenting phone records showing Vanessa's frequent contact with the county clerk employee, suggesting possible collusion to expedite paperwork. She detailed the meetings with the developer, the timeline Vanessa had outlined for executing her plan. Finally, David took the stand. My strong son, who'd been raised to trust and love openly, described how Vanessa had manipulated him into signing documents without proper review, how she'd isolated him from me, how she'd portrayed herself as someone passionate about preserving family legacy while secretly plotting to destroy it. I trusted her completely, David stated, his voice steady despite the emotion. I signed whatever she put in front of me because I believed she loved me, loved what we were building together. I had no idea the woman I married didn't even exist. It was all a performance designed to steal my inheritance. Vanessa's attorney attempted to argue that the recording was inadmissible, that the previous marriage was irrelevant, that David had signed the documents as a competent adult and should be held to his agreements. But the weight of evidence was overwhelming. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up, her expression severe. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation and intent to defraud. The property transfers are hereby voided. All documents signed by Mr. Morrison related to business ownership are nullified pending a full investigation by the Attorney General's office into possible criminal fraud. She turned her gaze to Vanessa, who sat frozen in her chair. Mrs. Morrison, or whatever your real name is, you are fortunate this is a civil hearing. I am referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution. I suggest you retain criminal defense counsel. The gavel struck, and it was over. Vanessa stood abruptly, her perfect composure finally cracking. She looked at David with something almost like desperation. David, please, it's not what it sounds like. I do love you. I was just trying to protect our future. Don't. David's voice cut through her pleading like steel. Don't insult me with more lies. We're done. My attorney will be filing for divorce immediately, and I hope they prosecute you for everything you've done. She opened her mouth to argue, but Strauss grabbed her arm and practically dragged her from the courtroom. As they passed, she shot me a look of pure venom, all pretense of sweetness finally stripped away. The hallway outside erupted in controlled chaos. Reporters who'd gotten wind of the hearing surrounded us, cameras flashing. David handled it with surprising grace, making a brief statement about being grateful for justice and asking for privacy to rebuild his life. As we left the courthouse, the clouds finally broke, sunlight streaming through. It felt symbolic, almost too perfect, but I didn't care. My son was safe. Our family legacy was protected. The next few months were a whirlwind. David's divorce was finalized quickly, since Vanessa wanted to avoid further legal exposure. The district attorney did file fraud charges, and Vanessa took a plea deal, accepting probation and restitution in exchange for avoiding jail time. She left Connecticut entirely, and I heard through Catherine that she'd moved to Florida, hopefully far from any more potential victims. The whispers and rumors that had plagued me died down once the truth came out. Sarah Martinez from the bookstore approached me at church with a genuine apology, shamefaced. I should never have believed her lies about you. I'm so sorry, Margaret. Mrs. Chen brought flowers to the bakery, tears in her eyes. We all failed you, and I'm ashamed. You were right about her all along. The community rallied around us in ways that restored my faith in people. Business at Morrison's bakery increased as locals showed their support. David threw himself into work, slowly healing from the betrayal through the familiar rhythms of baking. One evening, about 6 months after the hearing, I found David in the bakery after hours, just like that morning when everything began. He was pulling sourdough from the oven, the crust golden and perfect. When he saw me, he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. Mom, I've been thinking. I want to officially make you co-owner again. Equal partners, like you and Dad always were. This business belongs to both of us, and I never should have let anyone make me forget that. I embraced my son, breathing in the familiar scent of flour and yeast that meant home, that meant family, that meant everything we'd fought to protect. Today, Morrison's bakery is thriving. David is dating again, cautiously but with hope, having learned to trust his instincts and listen to those who truly love him. I'm still there, every morning, working alongside my son, teaching him the recipes my grandmother taught me, ensuring our legacy continues. The lesson I take from all of this is simple but profound. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even when everyone else tells you you're mistaken. Protect those you love, even when they can't see the danger themselves. And never underestimate a mother's determination to save her child. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone else who might be facing their own Vanessa, their own betrayal. Stand strong, gather your proof, and fight for what's right. Justice may take time, but it does come. God bless you all, wherever you're watching from. And remember, family legacies aren't just about buildings or businesses. They're about the love and sacrifice that built them, and that love is worth fighting for.